In a remote, abandoned corner of Europe, there was an ancient castle shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. Locals avoided this place, whispering about vampires who were rumored to live in its shadows. These creatures were terrible. They were tall, with pale skin that seemed to bleed with cold, and sharp fangs capable of tearing flesh. Their eyes glowed red, and at night you could see their silhouettes dancing in the moonlight. A hunter named VanHelsing, a legend among his people, was determined to put an end to this horror. His thick black coat fluttered in the wind, and his massive crossbow was ready for action. VanHelsing knew that vampires were not only physically strong, but also cunning as the devil. He carefully prepared by collecting sacred artifacts, silverbullets, garlic, holy symbols, and sacred water. As he walked up to the castle, he felt himself trembling. The entrance gate was covered with mold, and when he entered, darkness hugged him like an old friend. There was an eerie silence inside the castle. Cobwebs hung on the walls, and strange noises could be heard from around the corners, as if something was watching him. VanHelsing began to explore the halls where courtiers once frolicked. Suddenly, he noticed silhouettes that appeared and disappeared at the edge of his vision. Their faces were disfigured, their eyes filled with hatred. The vampires were slowly emerging from the shadows, their fangs gleaming in the dim light. They hissed and threatened, but VanHelsing was ready. He pointed the crossbow and fired. An arrow pierced the chest of one of the vampires, and he rolled his eyes and disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. But it wasn't just ordinary vampires hiding in this castle. VanHelsing felt that he was being confronted by something much more dangerous. Suddenly, loud laughter was heard in the hall. The leader of the vampires came out of the darkness. An ancient vampire named Roger, dressed in a black robe with a face radiating sinister charisma. "You're brave, hunter, but you don't understand who you're dealing with," he said, his voice like the hiss of a snake. VanHelsing did not back down. "I have come to put an end to your rule," he shouted, throwing garlic at Roger. The vampire recoiled, but then returned to the attack with a grin. The battle was fierce. VanHelsing fought many vampires using his agility and experience. He dodged their attacks while the arrows whistled through the air. Every vampire he killed left a dark trail behind him, dark shadows that tried to drag VanHelsing into the abyss. He could feel the darkness trying to overwhelm him, but with each shot, his resolve only grew stronger. Finally, VanHelsing came face to face with Roger. A battle full of fury broke out in the main hall of the castle. The vampire who had once been magnificent now seemed only a shadow of his past. VanHelsing knew that only light could conquer this darkness. He threw sacred water at Roger, who screamed in pain as the light engulfed him. A burst of light illuminated the gloomy hall, and VanHelsing, feeling that his life was at stake, rushed forward, covered with splashes of sacred water, straightened up, and his face twisted into an evil grimace. "You can't stop me," he shouted, his voice echoing like thunder. The battle continued, and every moment became more intense. VanHelsing noticed the other vampires gathering around them, their eyes burning like coals in a bonfire. He knew that if he didn't stop Roger now, then everything could be lost. The forces facing him were many times greater than his own, but the hunter knew that his determination and agility could change the course of the battle. Suddenly, Roger rushed at VanHelsing, and he barely managed to dodge. He threw a silver bullet at the vampire, but the vampire grabbed it in the air as if it were made of paper. "Your tricks won't work against me," Roger grinned as his teeth flashed in the bright hall. VanHelsing knew that he needed to use his knowledge and training. Remembering one of his old tricks, he took out the cross and, clutching it in his hands, began to cast a spell. The words of an ancient ritual poured out of his mouth, and the air around them began to tremble. The vampires, sensing the growing light, began to retreat in fear. Roger, feeling that he was losing control, screamed, You don't know what you're playing with." He launched a final attack, but VanHelsing was ready. He hurled the sacred water straight at the leader's face, and the leader staggered back, blinded. At that moment, VanHelsing took advantage of the opportunity. He took aim and fired the last arrow, which, like lightning, pierced Roger's heart. The vampire let out a brutal scream that reverberated off the castle walls, and then his body began to slowly disintegrate, disappearing into a black cloud of darkness. At that moment, the castle began to shake, as if it itself was a living being leaving this dark reality. VanHelsing knew it was time to run. He ran out of the main hall as the walls began to crumble and the ceiling collapsed with a thundering crash. Struggling through the rubble and debris, he made his way outside, where the morning light was beginning to disperse the night darkness. When he reached a safe place, VanHelsing turned around. The castle, once full of terror, was now immersed in the bright rays of the sun, and he knew that his struggle had not been in vain. The vampires, carried away by the darkness, were finally stopped, and peace returned to the village. But even a few days after this victory, VanHelsing could not get rid of the feeling that evil was still somewhere nearby. At night, he heard whispers coming from the forest and saw shadows moving under the moon. He understood that even though he had defeated Roger, the vampires could return, and his job as a hunter would never end. And although he became a hero in the eyes of the village, a shadow of fear remained in his heart forever. He knew that hunting vampires was not only a matter of courage, but also a relentless struggle against the darkness that never sleeps.